And it's great, because if you're out in the field, the panels are nice, or if you have to mail them, ship them, you have to worry about them getting perforated. And yeah, it lasts a long time, and it's all oil primed instead of acrylic primed. So the oil prime is not terribly absorbent. So it's very good for rubbing out. It's a whole different animal. When you get used to that, you can never go back to the acrylic prime, I don't think. In a pinch, you can paint on anything. But if you have your choice, and you spend so much money and so much time, and it's all so hard that you might as well have the best. And then the other thing is that you can get it tight as a drum. And sometimes you go to the store, and it's loose, or, yeah. So when we start, what should I do? Just
I'll introduce you, do an introduction, and then after that, however you want to handle it.
Okay, and just explain why I'm painting what I'm painting, and
what the process is. I'm sure questions are usually, what type of brushes, what type of paint, things like that come in.
Sure.
That kind of stuff.
Okay. I'm just going to make a few marks. I always hate the first, 5 minutes, and then I'm all right. What medium did you use before?
I did watercolor acrylics. Years ago, I did oil. And then when we lived overseas, and then when we came back, I ended up going to the high-tech field. I'm a systems engineer, and done.
Yeah, and oils take time to clean, and
Oh,
yeah.
You forgot to give me a microphone.
Is he coming back?
I have no one.
Do you have a loud voice? Oh, here he is, to save the day.
I have a loud voice. I've done presentations in front
Did
of
he hear you that you needed one?
It doesn't really work that way for television.
Oh. So did he hear you say that you didn't have one?
No, I said that first. I was talking to her.
Oh, okay, because she doesn't have a microphone, yeah. Okay.
Okay.
Sure.
Talk more? Okay, what do you want me to say? This microphone is not working well.
Yes? Can you speak a little louder? Like that? It was easier with Helen in the back with her little video camera. And all your friends sitting right here.
We tried the first two with YouTube, with Zoom.
Oh, with Claire and then with Donna.
Claire and with Donna, and it got to be too hard to do it in their own place.
Is it? Yeah.
With trying to have how many laptops going.
Yeah, yeah, I
So
bet.
when I talked to Susan, and she said we could set this up with Tony. I'm like, okay, let's try this.
Yeah, and then you have some consistency, and he obviously knows what he's doing. Yeah, yeah. I did, I think it was an hour and a half with Methuen, Merrimack Valley
Right.
group, and that was the same thing. It was on TV. It was fine.
So we've also talked to the telemedia here in Chelmsford, the TV station, and all the other TV stations.
Okay.
Okay.
Yep.
Yes. Now what? Okay, we're still not getting this line to work. Lane is already online.
There's a hum, and I don't know why, so
Is it the connection box or the wire?
I do not know. I'm gonna try this wire now.
I think I might start off talking about the materials and why I chose this painting. That might be a good idea to start.
Yeah, there's sort of an
Okay.
introduction to go forward with. Okay, let's hope this one works. We're a little past 30, 2 minutes past.
Like I said, people may be watching it later. They're probably all out bike riding. Except Elaine.
I see Elaine is on, so she's giving them a membership, a March's membership.
Okay, okay,
Have
yep.
a little talk here. It works with the two of us, one handling questions and somebody else in the background.
Yeah, you guys work well together. You've done a lot.
Yeah.
It's kind of kept it all going.
Okay, Mary, we cannot get this to work.
Okay.
Do you want to just do your own introduction? And then I can read you comments from the audience, and you'll probably be able to hear me because I'm loud enough.
Okay. Should I just say thank you for having me? And
Right.
okay. Sure.
Tony, just tell us when to start. Okay, 10, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, live.
Well, thank you for having me and setting this up and accommodating my difficult schedule. I appreciate it. And it's very nice to be here today. I think most of you know me, and I'm doing my own introduction because we had a little bit of a glitch. But I thought I'd first talk about why I chose to do this painting demonstration today. This was a painting that I did that got a lot of interest. So first I'll talk about my materials a little bit. This is on a cradled birch board, and And this particular painting, I used an oil primer, which is very nice because it's not absorbent. Normally, I use a Clausen's linen on a cradle board or a Clausen's linen on a birch panel. It's oil primed, and it's a beautiful Belgian linen, and it's very forgiving. It doesn't absorb, you can pull out, and it works very well. And when most of you know me for my portrait and my still life and some landscape, but marine painting is something I've been working on this year quite a bit. So the basic principles go along with whichever genre you're working on. And when you first set up a painting and you pick out a motif, you want to make sure that you have a very strong design. You want to have several large shapes and limited value so that you can make a very dramatic, strong piece. And in the beginning, you want to keep it very big and not break up those value shapes. So as an example, this was the original photograph, and this was my painting finished. And although the darks are darker in this and not as much in mine, you can always check to see if your painting is working when you start adding color. And you can do that by holding up a value scale. And now with the iPhones, you can take a picture of your painting as you're doing it and go into like a black and white or sepia tone, some type of a monotone, and check to see how the relationships are within the painting. And you want to keep those relationships strong. You also want to select a motif that has a variation of shapes, sizes, and you want to keep it interesting so you can avoid sameness. So those are some helpful things that I have found. So every painting is started a little bit different. If you're painting outside, if you're painting from your studies and your photos inside. But I always like to have generally an outside study that helps me with the atmosphere and the color. And if you've been there and experienced it, I think that it's you can make a better painting for the most part. So what I did today, this is a little bit different. It's the same photo, same day, but instead of cropping it, I'm doing it more of a landscape, a longer one. And it's a little smaller, and I thought I might perhaps get more done. So to begin with, I just outlined the big major shapes. And in the beginning, that's all we're really concerned about. No detail, no breaking up any shadow shapes. For brushes, generally, I always start with large bristle brushes, and you can get smaller as you go along.
So what is the size of the brush?
Well, this is a 16. I may use something like a 10 right now today, and I'm just going to roughly scratch in the big shapes, no detail. And then when I get them roughed in, I'm going to keep standing back and judging the relationships within the painting. It's not the relationship so much to the photo, to this, as much as within the painting. And if you keep doing that, it keeps you on the right track as you go along. So what I'm using right now is I'm using rectified turp, which really stinks. I'm trying to just use a little bit, and generally I just use that outside. It's preferable to Gamsol because it evaporates really well and really quickly, so this underpainting won't mess up the colors too much. But I also use Gamsol when I need to, and I'll be using that to clean and wipe out as I need to, as I go along. So what I'm using are a couple of transparent colors right now. I'm using transparent oxide red, and I'm using a little bit of ultramarine. And you could really use anything. You could use some burnt sienna, whatever you want. The transparent oxide red has a little bit of red in it, so it's kind of nice, the red, and you can add some yellow, pull out some oranges, and I think the contrast with the blues is really nice. This has faded a lot because it's not varnished right now, so some of the darks have sunk in. But after a few months, or even a little bit less in this case, you can varnish it and all the brilliance will come back out. So what I think I'll do right now, if anyone has any questions, that's fine. Otherwise, I think what I'm going to do is start blocking in. And I'm transparent oxide red, and it's a Rembrandt color. And I'm using an ultramarine blue. And I don't think it really matters the brand of that one. It's pretty straightforward. So I'm actually, when I do still life and portrait, I don't start with the darks. I start with color notes and more the lighter colors. But when I paint a landscape and I paint outside, I tend to stick with the transparent darks because then I know how dark I have to get. And then once you get all this blocked in, if it's wrong, it's so easy to just erase it, move it around. You're still in the searching stage. And I really enjoy painting rocks with all the hard edges, nothing curved, everything. Even if there's a rock that appears curved, you want to make a series of little short lines. It's kind of an important thing to remember. So I think it was helpful for me to take a few minutes and put in the structure lines right now so that I have a rough idea of where I want things. So this study and then these photographs were all taken at Bass Rocks in Gloucester. And we're so lucky to live near the coast, Maine, Gloucester, Rockport. And it's nice to find a way to try to connect these darks somewhat as well. So at this point, I don't want to break them up too much, but I also want to be aware of where the sun is hitting the tops of the rocks. As the value goes down, obviously it drops a plane. And then there's some reflected light as well, because this is not completely straight down or across. It's a little bit darker. So I think I have a basic pattern right now for the rocks. So now I'm going to paint in the dark of the water. This turned out to be a very bright day, and the water was really blue. And again, hopefully that will evaporate fairly quickly so that I can get some color in before the end of this. And then another thing, as you're going along, as your colors meet, as your big value shapes meet, keep your edges in mind. Like water's always going to be soft, your edges are always going to be soft, whether this is a more readable edge than this, but it's still going to be soft. Well, this is really a fun way to begin a painting. I don't always begin this way, but it is fun. And sometimes you have limited time, and you can do these really great exercises. And I'll hear a lot of people come and say, I have trouble with the values. But if you get into color before you really know your values, your painting doesn't hold up, you know. I don't need as much color up here because it's pretty light. And if there was something that was really off once I get it all set up, I can just go in and wipe it right out and start again. Yeah, and even the Gamsol works pretty well with that. And it's very freeing, you know. You're not worried about every little stroke that you put down. But I also think, for me anyway, when you start a painting, you want to know where you're going with it. You want to have a plan in your head. You want to visualize it, because otherwise you don't know where you're going and you're just putting down a lot of things. And you really kind of have to stick to that plan. Sometimes as you go along, you may decide, well, I think that this would be more effective, and you want to change the design a little bit, or maybe quiet something so that it's not interfering with the main idea of the painting. But in general, I think it's nice to know where you're going. if you do a large painting, I don't always do these underpaintings, but if I do a large painting, I try to, even if it's on a smaller study. But when you do a large painting, something that works really well with something that's smaller doesn't always hold up. So before you put in hours and weeks and time and all this expensive paint, you want to make sure you have something that's going to hold up. So you could do it with this wipeout technique, or you could use, or you could just paint this on without wiping out, and if that works better for you, do it that way. And the longer that I paint, the more I realize, I think when I first started painting, I was so worried about like the technique and the cut, everything, except the design used to come last. And now I've changed that, and it's like, to me now, like that's what I've really, really been working on. So that you don't waste time doing paintings that don't, what you feel aren't as successful. So I'm going to stand back for a moment before I go any further. And so these rocks, they're light, but they're not as light as that little bit of white. You would think there would be a lot of white in this, but there's not as much white as you think. If you squint down and you look, basically you've got the white here and some here, but the rest of it really is not all that white. So this, I like this transparent oxide red a little better than the burnt sienna. The burnt sienna, it gets very orange, but it's a nice color to mix. And again, I'm comparing my values. This is a little bit lighter than the rocks. I think the rocks maybe had a local color that was a little bit darker. They also are probably wet, more wet there than in the front. And what's nice about this is I can see a little bit of my structure lines showing, which is good. Now the bottom of the waves, I'm just going to put this down for a moment. I've got enough paint on there. The bottom of the waves aren't getting any sunlight, obviously, so that's going to be quite dark. It's a Viva paper towel, and they're nice to use, yeah. They don't fall apart. Viva. The Viva, yeah, yeah. They're almost, yeah, they're really nice. They're almost like a cloth, yeah, and they hold up nicely. Okay, so let me see where I'm at again. You could really do the whole thing with a paper towel.
It looks like you are.
Quite a bit. All right, so by standing back and looking, I think I need to establish this dark a little bit more. It's really not receiving any light, or very, very little light. When you were there, you could see that it's not black. You know, there is some color in the shadows there. Are there any other questions about materials or paint? Okay. So I won't add any white to this until like really the very end, because there's no need to. Fortunately, you know, you have the white of the linen, and I think the sky is probably a little lighter than I have it right here. And worst case scenario, if it didn't have time to evaporate and dry a little bit, then I can certainly wipe it out.
So you have your turp in little cans?
I have this one marked for the rectified turp. It's really strong. And then this one for the Gamsol. And it's nice because they seal, and if you take it somewhere, you don't have to worry so much about it leaking. Well, especially when you're painting from life, which I'm not right now, you know, you're so intent on your painting that sometimes you're not paying attention and your brain tells you that you're doing everything the way you want it. You're putting it in the right place. So you have to keep your eye fresh. So if you stand back and you hold the mirror and you look at it differently, different perspective. Or you can just take a picture with your phone and turn around and look at that. Or if you're painting from a photograph, and this is more of a Tom Gill trick. And then especially if you're doing something where your drawing has to be exact, you're doing a flower or a person or architecture, and then it'll jump out at you if there's an error. It's really for a drawing error. So all those little things help. Now what I'm seeing now is this value is a little bit too close. And if I look at it, the water is almost as dark as the shadows here. Not quite, but it's close. So I'm going to add in some more paint there. And I think another thing that worked well with that painting is that the blue of the water with the orange of the rocks, I think it just was effective. And depending where you're painting, sometimes the rocks don't have as much orange or color in them, but these do. And then there's an interesting design area here that's really quite neat. I think how it just works really well. So while everything's wet, I just want to make sure I'm pulling out the white that I need to pull out. Okay, so now I'm past the opening stages. What I think I should do is give a little bit more definition to these rocks. Yeah, I think I was pretty close to it, that it works. And again, I'm still keeping it pretty light, pretty thin, I should say, not light. And now I'm looking for just some interesting shapes. And there's always so many interesting shapes with the rocks. Maybe Tony has some questions.
We had 11 people on, so far no questions.
Okay. Okay, I'm going to get away from this now for a little while. And I think what I'll do, and again, I don't want anything too sharp. I think my center of interest is going to be here, because I think you have the darkest dark against the lightest light here, and I think all these things are leading up to it. I think this would be perhaps a secondary center of interest. And it's kind of important to establish that, obviously. All right, so I'm going to switch to this palette. This is not my normal palette. This is what I generally use. If I'm painting in the studio, these are the colors that I generally use. And I could change that up if there were flowers that needed a specific specialty color or fabric. But outside, I tend to change it up a little bit more. Inside, I don't use any browns. I mix all my browns. But when I'm outside, I do take advantage of it. It's faster, and I can get to it right away. And then I also always take the time to do the color charts. If I add a new color, so that you know what it can do. And then if you have someone's model or flowers or wherever you are, you want to have a good knowledge of what you can do with your colors. So they're really, they look like they're a tedious thing to do, but if you find the time to do them, they're so worth it. And I did my original set years ago, but I'll add to it here and there. Okay.
So typically, how many color paints do you work with in the side of the paint?
If I were going to set up, I have a still life I'm working on at home, basically that would be my setup.
Okay.
But with the marine painting, I've been experimenting with the blues and the rocks, and I've been using more browns and different blues. But basically, everything I'm doing here, you could do with that palette. You can mix everything. I try not to do too many colors because I feel like if you have the right combination, you can mix just about anything. And I think you have a little more harmony in the painting, with the colors that don't just shoot out from nowhere. A little bit of, how much red, how much yellow, how much blue. You can tilt it one way or the other, tint it one way or the other, and I think it just seems to work better if you limit it. So I thought what I would do is just a little bit of, maybe I'll put the colored photo up. And there's a lot of orange in the rocks. Especially where the sun is hitting them. Maybe I'll just put this up here. So quite a bit darker than it is down there. And we have the orange underpainting showing through from when I used the transparent oxide red, which is really nice. So now I'm just going to mix up a little bit of orange. Went a little bit too much in the red. So I'm just going to mix up a little bit and just pull it in for a few areas here. And again, not a lot of detail at this stage, just still exploring. And again, I'm using filbert brushes that are, they hold a lot of paint, which is really nice. And this is that area that's like a bit of a secondary area of interest, but it was really fun to play with that. And then this area, I'm going to put a little bit, I think a little bit more, it's cooler. It's much, the light is hitting it, but I think it's bouncing because it's so much cooler than the light up there. So I'm going to add a little blue to it. And I just grabbed a little bit of ultramarine and I mixed it into the orange mixture just to cool it a little bit because it's not getting the full sun up there as that is. But again, it's much lighter than the dark that's around it. And again, up here, I see a little bit of that too. The rest of these areas are pretty strong light and dark top and side, with a few exceptions. And then always when the waves are crashing like that, it's always fun to find these little areas where you have some of the water puddles just sitting there reflecting. So there's going to be a little more blue in that as well. And again, some orange. And then there's like a little bit of light hitting the edge of these rocks here. So that's kind of also another fun area. And if you can find those fun little shapes, it can really elevate the interest in an area. So now I'm going to attempt to put in some of the blue that I see. These are most of the brushes that I use. The bristles, a lot of them are the Robert Simmons Filbert, but I use a lot of rosemary brushes. Just love them. I have of all different ones. Rosemary and Company. They're from England. They're a wonderful company to deal with. And if you go on their website, it's overwhelming. They have so many brushes. But a lot of my brushes are from there. And these are like a white, they're an ivory flat, and they're a synthetic, and they have a lovely bounce to them. I also have a lot of sables from them. And a lot of my workshops and classes, we've done a lot of flower painting. And the filberts are just lovely. So if you go on the website, they're wonderful. And they're not very expensive. They deliver them really quickly. And they're just a great company to deal with. So this seems like it may pick up a little bit of the blue, but I'm going to just see. And I'm going to lay the blue down without fussing with it too much.
So it's just ultramarine blue at this point?
Well, I'm going to mix I didn't bring cerulean. I'm just going to mix it with a little bit of Viridian. And it's the Rembrandt Viridian that I'm using. So that should mix together quite nicely. And I'm just going to put I have no idea how I am doing on time.
It is 33 minutes.
Okay. So usually I don't use a lot of medium, but I'm using a little bit because I just want to make sure this spreads well. So all I'm using right now is I had a little linseed oil and some rectified turp, but I just want to get an idea. This water is pretty blue. So I think if I can keep the paint fairly thick, I think I'm going to do okay without it, picking up the underpainting. So before I paint in too much, I just want to do a section and stand back and see if it works or not. So you could call these color notes. They're just notes of color, enough so that you can judge. And you can see how it's it gets a little warmer as it comes down here. So I think there's probably maybe not that light, but it's just trial and error. I feel like in the back, where the deeper blue is, sometimes it needs like a little alizarin. I don't know why that is, but it just does. It helps push it back a little bit, and I think that may be a little dark, a little dramatic. But until we get a few more things in, you can't really tell. You need to get like pretty much all your color notes in and established before you start deciding if that's the perfect thing. Because when you place something next to it, it's going to look so different. So now I'm going to put a little bit of the sky in, and I think it's probably going to be a little lighter.
Okay, I have a question again about what brand of brushes, so that we can see the link to the
Oh,
type of brushes on.
Rosemary and Company.
Okay, Rosemary and Company on brushes.
Yeah, yep. And together with a lot of my students, although we haven't been together in almost a year now, we put in so many orders with them that they do give us a little discount. So feel free to mention my name. If it'll help, I don't know. And if they really represent a lot of artists, so if there's a particular artist that you really like their work and you want to see what they use for brushes, the website is really quite comprehensive, and you can look up an artist, and a lot of them have brush sets with that artist's name. Or you can pick and choose, but you can buy full sets. That's how I got started, honestly. And then I had a student from Westford, and she came and talked us all into trying them, and she sent away for them, put in the order for me, and got us all hooked. And that was a few years ago. So again, now I'm just kind of, I really can't see it. I'm right on top of it. I have to stand back to see if it's starting to work together. And I'm going to get very close to the foam. I'm going to get right up close to the foam. But I'm not going to have those edges meet, because when you have two shapes meet, you want to make sure you know what edge you're going to have, because otherwise you're going to be going back to try to soften it. And it's a lot easier to make a soft edge hard than a hard edge soft. So I actually, in order for this to flow and that hopefully I can finish it, or semi-finish it, I put on a lot more medium than I normally would. Otherwise, you don't have as nice a texture. No, I don't think it matters, because I paint wet into wet. Yeah, so it doesn't matter. And usually I do a little bit of mixing on this, but I try to do more of the mixing on the palette. It's an impressionistic technique that really gives you like a nice vibration. So I feel like it's, in general, I think it's okay. It's working. I think that as you get close to the horizon, especially in Cape Ann, you tend to get like a pinkish color. I don't know if you've ever noticed that. But even if it doesn't show up in the photo so much, I know it was there. Yeah, and sometimes, like, this was a really bright day, so it was such a strong line, where other days, usually, it's not so strong. Usually it's quite misty. And I think it's easier when you paint on site because it's easier in a lot of ways because everything you need to see is right there. However, it's more difficult because everything's changing. So you have to make a decision, do I hang on to what I saw and what I went after, or is an effect that's changing something that you want to get?
So would you continue painting on site or part of it and then take photos and then finish it up?
Normally what I did was I always did these little small things on site, and then I would bring them home and work with those and the photographs and put it together for a larger painting. And I still do that. But the longer I've been painting, now I'm able to finish things on site or maybe go back to the same spot under the same conditions. So if I'm after a really, really large piece, I will do all my collection of studies and go home to the studio. But sometimes in the summer, you have days that are very consistent. And if I can go back to that spot enough times, I can finish it from the field, which is preferable. So I'm getting close to locking it in here. This painting I have to go back into again. Not only does this need to be varnished, but I started playing with the wave and I ended up adding too much white. So that's another problem that I think we all have. You almost need someone to take it away from you at times, and it's done.
I did that the other day on my seascape, and I had it on the side of my desk, and I ended up pulling it over and putting some more white into this wave.
Yeah, and then you look at it the next day, and
It's like,
why didn't I leave it alone? Yeah, yeah. So here's another kind of a different mixture. If you use I don't think I brought it with me, but transparent oxide brown and Viridian with a little bit of white, you get this wonderful, I'm going to see if I have it, you get this wonderful neutral. And then that neutral you can tint cool or warm, but it's a nice combination, and I may have it with me.
And what trend, you know, the brand you were talking about,
Yeah.
brand paint.
And they're Rembrandt, and I guess I don't have it, but you can do it with a transparent oxide red, but it's going to obviously be a little bit warmer. So, but if you have the transparent oxide brown, it's really quite nice, especially if, with still life, it's quite nice too.
Now, do you like the transparent paints in Rembrandt better than those?
I actually do. I've tried other brands, and I really like them better. I mean, you can buy some that are more expensive, but I haven't found them to be better. So this is just like a neutral color. I don't know if you can see that. And again, it would be more neutral if it was brown. This is a little warmer. So what I was thinking of is, as I'm getting into these waves and getting into the underpainting, this is, I want to start working on these edges. Okay, now when I put it down, that's much lighter than I expected it to be. So that might work really well up here. Of course, you might mix it on here and you think it's perfect, and it may not be, so. So the edges of these, they remind you of clouds almost, but they're, you know that there's a lot of droplets and spray, so it's not going to be, it's still pretty transparent. Yes. Okay, and you can see there's like a pattern. When you're painting water, it's really painting patterns. And then you can have some fun with it, and you can see how there's so many purples and blues and greens and pinks. So you can really, it's infinite. So I think that this value is probably pretty good for that middle value of the clouds. But under here, I'm seeing something quite a bit darker. So I think I'm going to use almost like a purple. A little bit of yellow. And I feel like this is getting little to no light down here. Well, I made like a purple, but I added a little bit of yellow, so to tone it down a little bit, so almost a little not so strong. And I'm looking for areas where the light isn't reaching, so we know it's going to be a little bit darker. So, thank you. So probably I would normally not go into the white so soon, but I think I'm going to, where we have limited time. And I'm going to add just a very little bit of Viridian. And I'm going to see how this works up here. I'm just going to put a note down. And I think it works. I'm going to add a little bit more and maybe a tiny bit of blue into it. And I don't want it to be as light as the highlight where the light is hitting that wave. And then over here, yeah, I think we have some blue up here. And I don't like to use pure white, but I think it's picking up some of the other color. And I think that there's probably kind of a warm yellow, almost an orange, because of the sky is so bright. So I'm just going to tint that white a little bit so it's not quite so white and pasty. And I'm going to just put a little bit of Cad Yellow Deep, which I don't use it that often. I don't know if you can see the difference there. Yeah. So not too much of it, but enough that I think it's where the sun is hitting that section of the wave. And again, I keep thinking I have to avoid sameness because there's all these subtle little differences, and that's what makes it really so beautiful. And I feel like the white in here probably, if I were there, it would also have a little bit of that yellow. So this is really pretty much a strong reader right here, speaking of edges. So before I get into any more details, what I keep doing is standing back and just comparing the edges, the colors, the design. So now I'm past that, I guess now. I've pretty much decided I'm sticking with this design. And now I can modify the colors. And what I need to do is start bringing a little bit more attention to this, because this should stay in the lead, because it is my area of most importance. And this secondary area can lead to it. I'm not sure if I can do that and talk, but again, everything's wet and movable. And it's nice to start a painting when you know you have the time to get back into it while it's all still wet and you don't have to go back into dry paint. If I don't step off the edge, I'm good. Yeah. So it's kind of it's interesting. It's like there's a kind of a play between the hard and soft edges with this, with these waves. It's a little back and forth, and it's what keeps it interesting. But I hit the jackpot last year, and we must have been there right after a storm, and I got so many great wave paintings from it that it was just fun. You know, it's other days, you know, you're not as lucky, but it's huge. Yeah. A few years ago, I was up in New Harbor, Maine, with friends painting, and there was a hurricane down south, and oh my gosh, it was just amazing, the waves. That's why I say we're so lucky where we live. And again, I'm picking up some dirty stuff under there, but it might be okay because I don't want this to be too white. So I think it's working. I have to get away from it a little bit. And it's interesting to do this same photo in a square, which I don't usually do, and lengthwise. I think I tend to prefer this one because there's so much going on in here, and there's so much you could do to develop it, and you could do a lot of knife work in there as well.
And why don't you like square painting?
Well, it's not that I don't like them. I find them harder to design. I like them very much, but I just don't tend to do that. So I've done a few of them lately just for the fun of figuring out how it will be. So what I did was just crop these, and I think that in this painting, I think it was very effective. Okay, so I'm seeing these white shapes, white shapes. So they're really the lightest thing in my whole painting. So this is a this particular knife. I like the shape of it. I don't even know what it's so old. I don't know what the color is, what the number is. But you can move things a lot faster with the knife, and you can get some really great effects that you can't get with a brush. You know, if I'm doing something that's a little bit more abstract, so, you know, you can have a lot of fun with it. It can move it along a little more quickly too. Especially when you have the transparent underpainting and then you have the thick opaque paint, it's nice. And if you're going to go back into it, you can scrape down those edges if it's not going to be your final day with it. Well, not right now. Now I'm laying the paint in. But if it was the end of the day and I knew I was going to go back into it next week, I wouldn't leave those edges. I'd scrape it down so that it would be flat. It's all right to have those edges if it's your last day that you're working on that area or you're working on it. But you can get some nice edges with it. Sometimes I use that cold wax medium. Not a lot, but sometimes I do. And that also gives you, it gives you a nice thick impasto. And then when the painting is dry, you really don't have to varnish it. You can buff it and you get a very nice effect. I've never done the acoustics. I'd like to. I haven't done that. This is just the cold wax medium. It's not, I don't think it's as involved as that. The encaustic you have to heat, and yeah. Yeah. Oh, yeah. I have a like air purifier with a HEPA filter where I use the oil paint too. Yeah. It gets to you after a while, and I'm not usually sensitive to it, but I can be. Lately, I notice that it gets a little much. And the palette knife can be really nice to smooth edges as well. Now, to me, this is a little bit much, so I'm going to go back in with my brush. And there's a lot of different color in here that I didn't get. So I can just spread around the paint. I like the edges I got over here better. And it's fun, too, when you're painting these in a group, which we've done a lot of. It's fun to see the colors that someone else will pull out or the effects that they are out, and we're all a little different. And again, everything still, it's just so wet and workable. It's so nice.
Okay, I have a question of what type of varnish do you use and how long do you have to wait before applying the varnish?
The million-dollar question. It gets very difficult because if you have done a commission for someone or you have a show and your painting is drying and the darks have sunk in, you can be really anxious to get that done. What I tend to do is I'll give someone the painting and let them know that I'm going to have to varnish it in a few months. Preferably 6 months. Sometimes it doesn't take that long. Depends how thick your paint is, what you've used. Gamblin has a product that they say you can use as long as it's dry to the touch. I don't know if that's true or not, but I know that's what most people use. I use a product, and I'm not going to be able to think of the name of it. I didn't bring it, but anyone can email me if they want. Peter Kostelakis, I always go to him for advice because he's been refinishing and restoring paintings for years. I have some other friends that do as well. And I can't think of the name of the product, but that's generally what I use. And I wait until it's months dry. Yeah. But it is a problem, and that's where acrylic is nice because the acrylic dries right away, and you don't have that waiting period. But yeah, but I think if you talk to people up front, if it's a commission, you know, you both have an understanding. If you have to ship it to a gallery, then it's a little tougher. So I try not to have like real thickly painted paintings. I have 3 in Sarasota right now, but they were plenty dry and varnished, and they were fine. But it can be a problem because you want your painting to look at its best when it goes in a show, and sometimes it doesn't, you know, if it isn't varnished. Yeah, I usually bring the varnishes with me to put them out.
Another question is it Gambar?
Yes, Gamva. A lot of my friends use that, and I've used it on paintings that were maybe a month and a half if I've had to, and they're not a lot of opaque paint, not a lot of white, and I have used it and it's been fine. But if I have a painting that is built up with layers of paint, I don't. I use the other one. I can't think of the name of it. If Peter's watching, he can call in. You can get it at Michael's. It's nothing too fancy.
Do you have a newsletter that they can subscribe to?
Yes, I do. My website is o'connellfineart.com, and there's a contact page, but there's also a newsletter page, and I send one out about once a month.
Okay.
Yep. And it tells what shows are in the area, new artwork, any news like that. Yeah. And that's been really nice because you can keep in touch with people with it too. People give you feedback, and it's worked out quite well.
Ever win anything on the Chelmsford Art Society website? Let me know.
Oh, okay, thank you. Yeah, Tom Cristiano always says, why don't you post your newsletter? But I could do that.
I know Dan is no longer doing a newsletter for us.
Oh, she's not? Yeah. Are you doing it now?
No, I'm just doing the website.
The website.
Since our this Chelmsford Art Society website got redone, I now have a news section, an event section, so I'm putting things currently up there.
So that might work as well because it comes in everyone's email box. Yeah. So you and Elaine have been very busy.
Well, we need to keep it going. It's 50 years, so.
I know, and it's been wonderful.
They have COVID.
And so many friendships and, so much over the area. So these, I don't know if I pointed these out before, but these are studies I did. None of them are done, and I'll just leave them because it was good for me to remind me of the day that I painted them, how they looked. And I have racks of them at home. Once in a while, I'll take one and finish it, but for the most part, this was Pemaquid Point and New Harbor, Maine, and this one, St. George and Apalachicola. And all these little studies you do, it reminds you of where you were at the time, what the day was like, what the atmosphere. And sometimes those are better than the big finished paintings. So, and if you use too much medium, which I used quite a bit of turp in this because I was moving it around, it doesn't give you quite as nice a texture. So normally I wouldn't use quite as much. Then I may not do too much more on this. Also, those brushes, several people are interested. Sometimes the shipping is not bad. It's quite reasonable from England. Everything about them is reasonable. Few people can go in on them together, and that helps too.
I have someone making a comment that my mentor uses Kamar, K-A-M-A-R varnish.
Mm-hmm. And can you ask them what they recommend for drying time? The problem is if the paint is dry on top, but it's not completely dry underneath, there's still movement. So that's how you get cracking years later. I mean, it might be 50 years later and we might not be around, but it might look fine to give it to the gallery, to give it to the customer, but it's not going to hold up. It's not going to hold up the test of time. And I always feel like if people are spending their hard-earned money, I don't want to worry. Like, I want to know that it's not going to come back on you, So no matter what kinds you use, and I think that the Gamvar is fine. Like I said, if you have a thinly painted piece and it's not a lot of opaque, slow drying, that makes a huge difference as well. But it's not a popular subject. Like, a lot of people really don't want to hear that. So, yeah. So that's about, this I could go on for a long time. I'm probably not going to finish it today. But if anybody else has any more questions, or normally still life and portrait is what I've painted for years in landscape, but the marine painting has been really fun, and it's something I love to do. So I've been trying to do a little bit more studying. Like, these are pretty simple and straightforward, but when you do the larger paintings, there's a lot you really need to know about the tides and the waves. And so it's been a whole new genre for me to learn about, the science of it. Yeah.
I find one of my favorite places is to go to Acadia.
Oh, I've never been. I've been trying. Yeah, I haven't been there. Have you painted up there? Yeah, I have not. I've gone to New Harbor many times, and a little bit north of there, I can't think. But I never seem to get any further than that. But I will hopefully get there. But I'm lucky to be in Gloucester, and Rockport is so close. And Ogunquit you can do in a day. Yeah.
So the person that was talking about the other brand of varnish said that it weighs up to a year.
Oh, okay. For the one with the K. What was that? K?
AMAR.
Okay. Then I'm sure that's fine. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it depends. It depends. The longer you can wait, the better. They say 6 months. And some people paint very thick, very impasto. This, I probably waited a good 6 months or more, but it's not, it's all pretty much the same consistency. It's not a thick painting.
Okay, I have a question of after COVID goes away, will you be teaching and where will you be teaching?
Well, I used to teach on Thursday nights at Colleen Scroy's in Billerica, and we have the best, most wonderful group of people. And she did end up closing. She's teaching online now. So I'm not sure where. And I also used to do workshops at the Whistler House Museum of Art in Lowell at the Parker Gallery, which were great because we had the entire gallery. That's coming down because they're building a new Parker Gallery, so that won't be an option. So I'm not sure where. I do teach outside at Griggs Farm in Billerica, and I can teach outside other places. But I don't have a plan for an indoor venue yet.
Okay.
Yeah, I have to work on that.
So are you going to do outside in the near future, or?
It'll probably be, probably a couple of times in the summer. I have a group of students that I'll contact, and we'll probably do that. Hopefully, depending on COVID in the fall, I can more regularly teach indoor. We'll see. Yeah, I have a show, a solo show in August at the North Shore Art Association in the Gordon Grant Room. And so I'm going to have my work cut out for me getting ready for that, I believe.
Well, we can always book this for a workshop.
Oh, that's a great idea. And this is beautiful, centrally located. Do they have a plan as to when they're going to open up?
No,
Yeah.
no, that's the kicker, because we don't even know what's happening with the 4th of July yet.
Exactly. And I think we all have to be flexible, and it's, you know, I'm supposed to be an artist in residence in Gloucester for the month of September, and again, I don't think they know yet, never mind me. I was supposed to, last year it was canceled. So hopefully with the vaccines, things are moving along well in the good weather, but we'll all just have to stay flexible and healthy. But this would be a great spot. It's everything you need is right here, so that's good to know. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you very much. Tony?
You're very welcome, and thank you for having me and being flexible with my schedule. Is that it? Are we done?
Okay, we're clear.
Okay. I hope that was okay.